Hey there, peeps. So, let's talk about some newts for today. Not newts. Newts are small lizard like creatures. Notes can be things from music, like that very cool presentation we saw at the Artist Series. Love me some Django Reinhardt. Or they can be things that you need to keep track of. That's what this is. So, this is kind of a combination set of notes. If you are watching this and you're in a class that already covered this stuff, you're like, oh my God, they already covered all this stuff. Well, then maybe you just got to watch it to the end to see if there's anything we did. Just fast forward because it's going to go over a couple of topics here. So I'm going to divide this up. So this is the last part of our like looking at the unions before we actually get into the strikes. So let's do a quick recap. Um, Unions were legalized in 1842 in the court case of Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Hunt. And even with their legalization, the American people were very suspicious of unions. They felt that they were all part of a vast, like Illuminati driven conspiracy to overthrow the government and establish some kind of a Marxist country. And it didn't help matters any. This is what sort of the owners were saying. It didn't help matters any that um, the owners fed into this and people believed it because it was a way for the owners to not address real problems that needed to be taken care of. You know, issues like child labor, excessively long work days, really low pay, unsafe working conditions. And it also didn't help that many of the big unions in Europe were run by Marxists, and that wave of political immigrants in the 1850s who were escaping prison time in their home countries were in fact looking to start a Marxist government in America through the use and exploitation of labor. That having been said, there are some things that pop up. So we had the birth of the first nationwide union, the National Labor Union, fell apart when they just blatantly got too political and went all socialism on you. The Knights of Labor, a Catholic organization that avoided the wackiness, but unfortunately their success was interfered with by the wackos and brought them down. That leads us to this one, the third big nationwide union, the AFL, the American Federation of Labor. What began as the Federation of Organized Trades and Labor Unions. Now, that acronym would have been FOOTALOO, which sounds really odd. And if you take away the of and, it's FOTLOO, which sounds like a curse, which we don't want anything to do with. So it got shortened to the AFL. One of the founders of the AFL was this dude, Samuel Gompers. It sounds like a Wonka candy. Samuel Gompers is kind of an interesting cat. He was one of these political immigrants we talked about. He came to America. He was a socialist. He was an English socialist. And he came to America with the idea of basically getting unions to form and, pushing socialism. Gompers himself was a skilled tradesman. He was a cigar maker. I have never actually tried rolling a cigar, don't know how hard they are, but apparently it takes a lot of skill to roll a good cigar. What is interesting about Samuel Gomper's story is not the fact that he was a socialist, but the fact that he sort of gave it up because living in America, he realized that socialism was dumb and it wasn't going to work. And it kind of boils down to a couple of things here. Number one, the I think the epiphany moment for him. So, as laborers, they're fighting for better pay, better working conditions so they can be healthy and live good lives and more free time to enjoy themselves. But the socialist idea was is that there would be no private property and nobody would have stuff. Well, then why do you have money if you can't get stuff for yourself? That's a real good question. And I think Gompers kind of came to the conclusion, there really isn't a whole lot of point if we're not looking at the free market. Next thing, free market actually worked. It was benefiting people. And this led him to the conclusion that you really don't need to like overthrow the government or anything because it works pretty darn good. And the third thing, which is probably the single most radical thing that Samuel Gompers really is in favor of, instead of fighting with the owners and taking this sort of critical mentality, the critical theory mentality of it's us against them, it's the bourgeois, the proletariat. No, if you sit down and talk with them, it actually works better if we cooperate. And cooperation benefits everybody. This is a big point. Cooperation doesn't just benefit the workers, it benefits the owners. And this is really the heart of his argument in the speech that we read by him, what the working man wants. He makes the argument that, look, a shorter working day is going to be better for everybody. Why? Because workers will have free time. They will educate themselves with that free time. They will better themselves with that free time, a la the idea of the Knights of Labor. And with all that extra free time to enjoy themselves in their home, they'll buy stuff for their home. They'll buy nice furniture. Maybe they'll go out and buy a piano. That will benefit companies that make furniture and carpeting and draperies and pianos and lights. Well, what if they decide to go out? Well, that's even better. They're going to buy themselves nice clothes to look nice. They're going to buy their wife or girlfriend nice clothes so that she looks nice. They're going to spend money at restaurants and businesses and concerts and art galleries and museums. It's going to benefit the economy if the working man has less hours and good pay. Now, this is an important thing to understand. Gompers does not say less hours is less pay. He says we're going to get the same amount of pay, we're just going to work less hours. Not that we're going to get the same amount of money per hour, we're going to get the same amount of money, period, for less hours. That was his argument and what the working man wants. And it would benefit businesses because the workers would be more productive, they'd be more efficient, they would come up with solutions to make the business work better, and they would have money to spend on the stuff that the businesses make. And the businesses would benefit from all of that, and the workers would have better stuff, more free time, be less involved with escapist activities like drinking, and it would be better for society as a whole. The AFL is an umbrella organization. What that means is it covers a lot of different businesses. The way to think of it, and one of you actually brought this up, and this is a great analogy. The AFL is essentially a trust for workers. They don't exist to represent one group of workers. They exist to represent multiple workers who are all have one thing in common. Not what they do, but the fact that they are all skilled at what they do. They are specialized workers. They are specialized, which means that they make more money naturally. They do not have stuff in common with the untrained, unskilled workers. This is why they don't deal with them. The AFL was open to any skilled worker, whether they were white or non white, didn't matter. So long as you were a man and you were a skilled worker and actually an employee, not a self employed person, not a farmer, but an employee of a skilled trade, and you were a male, you were welcome in the AFL. And each industry had its own separate union within the AFL. So the cigar makers had a union, the shoemakers had a union, the haberdashers, hat makers had a union, the plumbers had a union, the carpenters had a union. They're all members of the AFL, but each of the unions does their own thing. That's how the AFL worked. The AFL was so successful that it's still around today. If you drive through Milwaukee, you will see AFL headquarter buildings in Milwaukee. I used to work not far from one. So the AFL is sort of like the apex of the big unions. Now, there's another one for unskilled workers called the Congress of Industrial Organizations. They come along later, and eventually they merge with the AFL. And we'll talk about them maybe a little bit later when we get into it. But the AFL is where we're going to end up here. Okay, so this is the last part of part 3, lesson 1, the progression of the union movements. Now we're going to move into part 3, lesson 2. So I'm going to make a separate video on that one. Let me just get this one taken care of. Peace and love.